Right, we're speaking about the fact that ISIS and other terrorist organizations are seeking to exploit vulnerable young refugee children, paying for their way to get into countries like ours and generally in our continent, and then attempt to use them and exploit those vulnerabilities for terrorist purposes. It's a report that my organization, Quilliam, is set to release tomorrow, but we're talking about it today. It's in the news today, and we've got the senior researcher with us, Nikita, Malik, to help us understand what's going on here. Good afternoon, Nikita.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Now, I've been speaking a lot about the problem, but I want to hear from you about some solutions. What can be done to make sure that, let me phrase the question in two ways. I mentioned before you arrived that there's a danger that we can either be blinded by our left eye or pop a blood vessel in our right eye. And what I mean by that analogy is that generally people on the left tend to be blind to these sorts of problems because they care for refugees and want to bring them in. And that's not to imply people on the right don't care for refugees. But generally, people on the right are concerned because they care about another problem, which is also valid, which is the threat of terrorism. And so the anger and fear from the threat of terrorism could lead to an overreaction. And so how can we develop solutions that are at once not Angela Merkel's open door policy and are also not Trump's travel ban when it comes to addressing the genuine concern of the radicalization of young refugee children?
So what was unique about this report is that we analysed the journeys of these refugees to find that there's no one single solution. In fact, the journey and the policy that needs to be implemented has to be divided into three parts. So the first part is refugees in conflict zones or internally displaced people. What policy is being put in place for those young children in Syria and Iraq who haven't managed to escape and are still living through conflict? The second is during the journey itself. Many of these refugees are exhausted. They tend to be radicalized during the journey or in the first safe country they go to, in the refugee camps or in the urban centres. What policy are we implementing there? And finally, once they reach the UK, are the government offices that are looking at these refugees, including the Home Office and immigration removal centres, and are they equipped with the right safeguarding to help these young people and protect them against extremism and radicalization? So there are actually we've identified 10 risk hotspots where refugees could be prone to radicalization and talked about specific policy implementation in each of these 10 points.
Are there children, tell us now, are there children in the United Kingdom who are in detention?
Yes.
But doesn't the Home Office say that's not the case?
Absolutely. So one of the most, I think, challenging aspects of doing this research was trying to find the number of children in detention, because that kind of information is not easily available or transparent. There are 11 immigration removal centres in the UK. We sent Freedom of Information Acts to all 11. We received a response from only one. To this day, Yarlswood has still not responded. There were 253 children in detention between 2010 and 2015. 11 of these children were on suicide watch. So
this is just so that everyone is clear, because this sounds scandalous, because we're not meant to be having children in detention, are we?
Well, as of December 2015, the Home Office made very clear in its audited statements that there were no children in detention, and they are correct. But given what happened with the removal of the camps in Calais, we obviously had children coming into the UK, and their first port of entry after that was being put in detention. They were put in detention centres, immigration removal centres.
And you've only had responses from your Freedom of Information request from one centre?
Tinsley House, yes.
And so that leaves how many that haven't responded?
Well, 10.
10?
Yes.
Have refused to tell you whether they have children in detention?
Well, it's they release audited statements, but what tends to happen is numbers don't add up. So I'll give you an example. The number of children that are unaccompanied children coming to the UK in 2015, the number released by Europol, Eurostat, is different from the number released by the Home Office. 3 children, Eurostat reports 3 children more than the Home Office does for the year of 2015, unaccompanied children coming to the UK and seeking asylum. Now, you could say that 3 is not a very big number, but these are 3 children who we don't know where they are. Where have they gone? And in the EU in general, 50% of children who come to seek asylum disappear. In
50%?
The EU, 50%. They disappear. And we don't know where they are. These children are going missing. Some of them run away because they're scared that they won't be given asylum. Some of them have come using smugglers and traffickers, so they go back to those smugglers and traffickers. And they end up in gangs or working in or doing child labor.
And final question before we're going to take a couple of calls, but final question. So these children, if they are in detention, how does that link to radicalization? Are they mixing with adults? I can imagine if they're mixing with adults in these detention centers, then perhaps they're under the influence of these individuals, and we don't know what's being spoken about. But is that what you're concerned of, or are there other factors that you're concerned of as well?
I think the two factors besides that I'm additionally concerned about is, firstly, these children are being separated from their families. And that is leading to, after interviews have been done with them just being miserable. And these statistics are obviously not available, but we are beginning to see a correlation, not a causation, between something called the politics of exhaustion. So it is these political institutions letting children down to such a degree that sometimes they end up just going back to, say, Afghanistan or Iraq and joining the extremist groups that they have tried to escape in the first place. Because in extremist propaganda, we increasingly see the importance of youth. They're obsessed with youth. And so for these children, for them, are a godsend if they're coming back.